And hi, everybody. Welcome back to Sports Talk. Doug Miles, Don Henderson with you. I'm here in Florida, down up in New Jersey tonight, and a great weekend of sports. Lots to talk about. Lots breaking as we just come on the air, Don, so we'll get right to that. But we also have a guest joining us on tonight's show, so lots to talk about.
Well, you're exactly right. It sort of dovetails because Bill Pepe's been so much involved in baseball for such a long period of time, and so we ought to bring him right up and talk about the major story, which obviously is Braun, and see his perspective on the situation, and then go right into some of the interesting books that he's written and what's happening.
Phil Pepe, of course, longtime sports writer up in New York. People around the country also know him for his many books on sports. Got a couple out right now. One, Core 4, The Heart and Soul of the Yankees Dynasty. Also wrote the book on Howie Rose, great Mets announcer, about the history of the Mets. And Phil Pepe joins us by telephone tonight. Phil, I know we talked a few years ago, and you had the book about the no-hitters and pitching out, but good to have you with us again.
I'm glad to be with you guys.
Well, we've got a lot to chat about tonight, and of course, you with two books out simultaneously, and they really made so much last night at the Yankee game up at Fenway Park about the Core 4, which fits right in with the story within you, and let's talk a little bit about the Core 4 and give some of the people an idea of how you came up with the idea and where it all went.
Well, actually, I didn't come up with the idea, but the publisher, Triumph Books, which is a publishing house out of Chicago, they came up with the idea. They came to me and suggested that they wanted to do something on the Core 4. And at first I was not really enthused about it because I have not really covered the Yankees in quite a while. I haven't been with a newspaper in almost 20 years, although I still stay interested in it and I still have contacts there. But I really didn't know these four guys. I knew about them. I really didn't know them, and I knew that I couldn't expect any cooperation from them. Because they don't know me and I don't know them, but they said they understood that. I said, if you would allow me to do it by talking to people about them and just discussing how they got to be Yankees, then I'd be interested in doing it. They agreed, and that's exactly what we did. So, I wound up talking to the college coach for both Jorge Posada and Andy Pettit. I spoke with Gene Michael. I spoke with people around the Yankees. I spoke with Mariano Rivera's first minor league manager. I spoke with Stump Merrill, who was the first manager to have the four of them as a unit at Columbus in the International League. And it was a very interesting project. Little did I know at the time that this was going to be a situation where we may be seeing the last hurrah of the Core 4. Posada has already retired. Mariano Rivera says he's going to retire, although the way he's pitching, it's amazing that he's not going to be pitching next year. He's still as good as ever. It looks like Andy Pettit is probably finished after this season, so the Core 4 would be reduced to a Core 1, assuming that Derek Jeter can get back on the field. And that's questionable right now.
Doug?
Okay, you had a chance to read through the book, Phil, and you got some of those great kind of behind-the-scenes background stories of these guys, and you talk about Mariano Rivera getting a very rare standing ovation from the Fenway Park crowd over the weekend on Saturday's game, but people really do appreciate him around the league, getting kind of the farewell tour, and it is hard to believe that he's going to hang it up, but he'll be one of the few ball players to kind of go out on top on his own terms. Very rare in any sport to see that.
Absolutely, and he certainly deserves all the accolades and everything that people are saying about him, and the way that fans and his opponents are just paying tribute to his career. He's just been unbelievable. What is probably even more unbelievable is when you look at these four guys, the only one that really ever had the prediction of being any good was Derek Jeter, because he was a first-round draft pick. The other three guys, Mariano Rivera wasn't even drafted. I mean, he was recruited, not recruited, but he was scouted while he started out as a shortstop. They scouted him in Panama when he was playing shortstop, and the scout who went down there turned in a very lukewarm report on him, didn't think he was a prospect as a shortstop. A year later, the same scout gets a tip that there's a pitcher down in Panama that should be looked at by the name of Mariano Rivera. And the scout said, wait a minute, I know that name. Could it be the same guy? He's a shortstop. Well, now he's a pitcher, he was told. So he goes down and he looks at him, and he thought it was just a lukewarm recommendation. He told the Yankees that he thought they should sign him, but not to spend too much money. Well, they signed him for $3,500. And look at what he's become. You go to Jorge Posada. He was a 24th round pick. Andy Pettitte was taken in the same year as Posada, 1990 draft. He was a 22nd round pick. I mean, you look at some of the names of the people who were picked ahead of Andy Pettitte. Have you ever heard of Kit Ohala or Tim Roomer or Keith Silver? None of those guys. They were all left-handed pitchers taken ahead of Pettitte, and nobody ever heard of them since then.
Well, I think it's very interesting. You've been around long enough as I have. Doug's a little bit younger than you and I, but I've never.
Everybody's younger than you and I.
I've seen a lot of tributes in baseball. You know, whether it's the all-time record or whatever. I never saw anything like what happened in the All-Star. People are criticizing. I can't imagine how you can criticize the way they handled Rivera and the way they brought him in when they knew he was going to be able to pitch instead of taking a chance that maybe he wouldn't pitch. And what happened with the way that the players respected him in both dugouts, the way the fans respected him, the fact that he had the field to himself. I mean, to me, just an unbelievable tribute to Mariano Rivera.
It certainly was. I think the people who criticized it felt that, well, he deserves to be the last guy to pitch, and he deserves to get this save, and so on and so forth. Well, that was fine, ideally, but suppose it turned out that there was no save, and he didn't get to pitch. So I got to give Jim Leland a lot of credit because it was his plan all along, and he was the one who told the players not to go out on the field, which was a wonderful tribute and just perfect. And I really can find no fault with it. Who cares about whether he got the save or didn't get the save? He came in, and he probably wouldn't have gotten the same kind of attention, spotlight in the ninth inning that he got in the eighth inning. I thought it was just a perfect thing.
Couldn't agree more. Doug?
Talking to Phil Pepe, the name of the book is Core Four. And Phil, you've been in New York for a long time, covered the Yankees back to the Mantle and Marish years. Of course, you write a lot about Derek Jeter and being the captain of the Yankees. How does he kind of compare to those early Yankee teams of the 60s when he had so many great players as far as leadership? Got to be right up there with all of them, right?
Oh, absolutely. I think that I was telling somebody recently, I got a phone call from a friend who was working on a book in which he picks the so-called Mount Rushmore of every major league team. In other words, the four players who are the primary players of that franchise. And I was asked to be part of a panel to select the four franchise players for the New York Yankees. And to me, it was a no-brainer. It's Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, Mickey Mantle, and Joe DiMaggio. They are the Mount Rushmore of the Yankees. But then I started thinking, well, what about the next four? Who would I pick right after them? And without a doubt, the next four would be Derek Jeter, Mariano Rivera, Whitey Ford, and Yogi Berra. So what I'm saying is that Rivera and Jeter are two of the 8 greatest players in Yankees history, and I think that's high tribute.
Well, that's putting you in a real class there, no question about that. I mean, if you're one of the 8 greatest Yankees of all time, you're in pretty good company.
And it might even be that Jeter is the 5th of those 8. I think I would probably put him right behind the top 4. And don't forget, the Yankees, with all their great players, have never had a player get 3,000 hits in the Yankee uniform, and Derek is the first one to do that. So, I mean, he's a no-brainer Hall of Famer. So is Rivera. The other 2 guys, I don't know that they will get elected to the Hall of Fame, Posada and Pettitte, but they certainly will be in the conversation.
Right. And how about the dramatic way he got it, 3,000 hits, a home run? He's done so many dramatic things. Just one more.
Yeah, people say, well, what is the greatest play, the greatest memory you have of Derek Jeter? And I can think about a half dozen off the top of my head. It's just he's been an amazing player, and he still is an amazing player. He was considered finished about 2 or 3 years ago, and last year he led the league in hits.
Well, I got a feel that if somebody were to ask me the greatest plays that Jeter ever made, that I think number one was when he had his back turned and flipped the ball back in the World Series. And
absolutely,
first of all, he shouldn't have been there in anybody's mind except Jeter's. He was in the right place at the right time. His second would have been to dive into the stands for the foul ball, and he went about 2 rows back in. They would have to be 1 and 2. The 3,000 hits would be right there too. So, but 1 and 2, that play at home plate in the World Series, to me is a play you're never going to see.
Playoff game against Oakland.
Yeah, that's right. Playoff, not World Series. Playoff.
Yeah, I agree. I think that was a remarkable play, and I mean something that you may never see it. It had never been seen before, and I'm sure we'll never see it again.
You covered baseball a long time, Phil. Have you ever seen a team, not necessarily just the Yankees, but go through so many injuries like this team has this year, and still, even though they lost last night, a tough one, have a winning record?
Yeah, that is amazing. But I think what the reason for that is they still play good defense. They have very good fundamentals, and they've had pretty good pitching, especially their bullpen. And and people have said for 100 years that you win with pitching. So I think that's what's kept them afloat. Their offense leaves a lot to be desired, but they get enough pitching to be in just about every game.
Phil, Joe Madden has proved that for the last 5 years down in Tampa with the Rays, because they had no hitting until this year, and they got into a very good groove 4 years ago, and looks right now they're making a charge toward the Red Sox. So pitching is exactly what the game's all about.
Oh, I agree, and I think that I told somebody recently that I expect to see the Rays pass the Red Sox in this series. It looks to me like the Red Sox are about ready to be taken. Their pitching is in disarray right now. Their bullpen is shot. They've got one guy down there. They've had 3 closers who are no longer pitching for them. So I think that the Rays are the team to beat in the American League East.
I sort of agree with you. And before we switch over to your book about the New York Mets and how he rose, any particular story that you'd like to bring to the fore about the core 4, that something that really struck you?
Well, as I said earlier, the whole thing about Mariano Rivera, how they found him and how he was at first a shortstop, so that was an interesting thing to me. The other thing is that Andy Pettit played for the coach that coached the college coach, San Jacinto Junior College. Played for the coach there, who's now the coach of Rice University, and he was also the coach for Roger Clemens. So here's a guy, coach, who has produced 2 of the greatest pitchers in the last 50 years.
Interesting stuff.
The other thing about the Jeter, I don't know if you're familiar with the Jeter story. Jeter was a 6th-round draft pick when he was selected by the Yankees. The number 1 pick that year was going to go to the Houston Astros. And the Michigan area scout for the Houston Astros was the old great left-handed pitcher, Hall of Famer Hal Newhouser, who won 2 major Most Valuable Player awards.
Right.
And he was scouting for the Houston Astros. And he had seen a lot of Derek Jeter, and he urged the Houston club to make him the number 1 pick in the country. And Houston, well, they weren't so sure. They wanted to get a guy who was more Major League ready. So they passed up Jeter, and they went for Phil Nevin. I mean, 5 teams, believe it or not, 5 teams had a shot at Jeter and did not take him. The first one was, as I mentioned, the Houston Astros. Then the Cleveland Indians. They took a guy by the name of Paul Shuey, who pitched briefly in the major leagues. Then the Montreal Expos had a left-handed pitcher named B.J. Wallace. Then came the Baltimore Orioles, and they chose Jeffrey Hammonds, who had a decent major league career. Then came the Cincinnati Reds, and they took an outfielder named Chad Mottola. And then came the Yankees, and they took Derek Jeter. Now, the other 5 players who were drafted ahead of Jeter were all college players. Jeter was a high school kid, so I guess some of those teams, they didn't want to take a chance on a kid that they had to wait 4 or 5 years before he would be ready to play in the big leagues. But the Yankees, I guess they needed a shortstop, and they had the luxury. They had some pretty good players already in New York. And the one scout who scouted Jeter for the Yankees was so much in favor of choosing Jeter as the number one pick for the Yankees. There was a discussion among Yankee personnel, and one of the people said, "Well, the rumor is that Jeter is going to go to college and accept a scholarship from the University of Michigan." And the scout who scouted him for the Yankees popped up and said, "Look, Derek Jeter is not going to go to University of Michigan. The only place he's going to go is Cooperstown, New York." And he was right.
No question about that. And I think the Cincinnati Reds, I guess they were sort of chewing their fingernails when it got down to that pick, waiting for somebody to be picked before, and hoping that Jeter would not be the one that was picked. And I think Stick Michael was very much in his corner too, wasn't he?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, he was. And also there were stories about how the Yankees almost traded Andy Pettitte to the Phillies. They almost traded Mariano Rivera to Seattle, and they might have done those two things if George Steinbrenner had not been on suspension at the time. And Gene Michael was calling the shots. And he's the one who insisted not to trade Rivera and not to trade Pettitte. And there was also a story about Rivera's first year. He gets signed by the Yankees, and he comes to the United States. Had never been out of Panama, and he's playing in Florida in the rookie league down there. And he had a clause in his contract that if he won the league ERA title, he would get a $500 bonus. Imagine that $500. And it came down to the final day of the season, and Rivera, who was now a relief pitcher for that rookie team, needed 5 innings to qualify for the ERA title. So the manager of the team, a guy by the name of Glenn Sherlock, who is now the bullpen coach for the Arizona Diamondbacks, he contacted New York and asked for permission to start Rivera, use him as a starting pitcher so that he can get those 5 innings in. Well, he started him. Rivera pitched a 7-inning no-hitter. And from that point on, that's when he opened the eyes of the Yankees, and they began to track him and follow him a little more closely. And, of course, the rest is history.
Well, of course, Wetland was really the closer. He was really the setup guy for a couple of years, and I don't think anybody had an idea that obviously nobody had an idea that what's going to happen happened. But they just assumed he was going to be a great setup man, and then all of a sudden he's the man.
Well, but in 1996, when they won the pennant, I think it was I forget who said that he never saw anybody as dominant as a pitcher in the major leagues as Rivera was that year. And I guess that's what encouraged the Yankees when the Wetland became a free agent. They let him walk, knowing that they had a guy ready to take his place. But nobody ever expected he'd be there for 19 years.
No, he'll never. I think what you said earlier is really it shows what a crapshoot it is. I don't care whether it's football or basketball or baseball or whatever. You can scout all you want to, but it's still a crapshoot when it comes down to picking the guy you want to get that turns out to be a great player.
Especially when you're talking about young players, 17, 18 years old.
Right.
How you're able to project what they're going to be like in 5, 6, 10 years, it's almost impossible. But, there are people who make a living doing it, and I have a lot of respect for those people.
So, Pepe, author of Core 4. Before we wrap up, Phil, I know we kept you a little bit longer than we said, but talk a little bit about it. I had a chance to read the other book, too, put it in the book with a great announcer, Howie Rose, not only baseball, but done a lot of great hockey announcing as well. People up in New York know him well, and talk a little bit about that project.
Well, that was completely Howie. I mean, I was asked to do that, and I said, I didn't. Howie has such total recall and so many great stories and so many memories about being a young kid who was a diehard Mets fan who would go to the games. And Howie is tremendous, and I just enjoyed working with him. All I needed to do with him was turn on the tape recorder, and every once in a while I'd ask him a question, and he just spoke. And he had all those stories, all those memories, all those anecdotes. It was such a simple assignment for me. All I needed to do was punctuate it and put the periods and the commas in the right place, and we had a book.
Well, he's been out publicizing the book a little bit, which is really nice, and he's really worked at that end of it as well. But I have not had a chance. Looking forward to reading the book. I have not had a chance. Did he talk anything about the controversy when he was at the Fan, and the Mets weren't too happy about him being the broadcaster? And
briefly. I mean, Howie didn't want to get into anything that would put anybody down. He's too nice a guy. So we minimized that, but he did mention it. I mean, he didn't duck any issues, but he wasn't putting any knock on anybody. He had some problems with Frank Cashin, the general manager. He had some issues there, but he handled it perfectly. He didn't duck it, but he didn't throw anybody under the bus, and Howie wouldn't do that.
Great.
Yeah, it's a great book. A lot of great stories, not only about the Mets, but about broadcasting, which we always like to talk about on this show. And Core 4, published, as Phil said, by Triumph Books. You've had a lot of great authors on from that publishing house, and they do a lot of sports books. So the name of that book is Core 4. Put it in the books is the other one. And Phil, a real pleasure to have you join us tonight, and hopefully we can do it again maybe sometime during football season. And thanks for joining us.
Anytime. I'm glad to be talking to you guys. It was a lot of fun.
Phil, it was a real pleasure. Thank you so much. And I'm in New Jersey here, and just across from the Yankees and Mets, and so I get a chance to see a few more games than Doug does out down in Sarasota. But we always enjoy talking New York baseball and New York sports.
Well, I'm in New Jersey also, and I'm around all the time. I go to high school games. I help coach an American Legion team. My grandson played high school baseball in New Jersey. My son is an agent, so I'm a baseball guy.
Where do you live in Jersey?
Englewood, New Jersey.
Englewood.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah. I lived in Englewood for a while. Yeah, great place.
Oh, wow. I had a son that was a great baseball player college-wise. He played at North Carolina, got the World Series a couple of times, and so I've been pretty much on the Jersey baseball scene from Little League right on up, and
what high school was
unfortunately, now the grandchildren are past that stage, so now I can't look for any more kids for a while.
Well, I'm in the same situation. What high school did your son go to?
Hopewell Valley.
Okay, oh, yeah, I know where that is, sure. Yeah, mine is around Caldwell. That's
Caldwell, sure.
It's where our American Legion team is.
Yeah,
anyway.
My son played on the Hopewell team. When he was in high school, they won the state championship a couple of times and had a pretty good run as an American Legion player. And as they said, got a shot to go to North Carolina, and it worked out well for him. And so always one of the great days was watching him play, to tell you the truth.
I understand. And at North Carolina, I think of Matt Harvey.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, there were a lot of great pitchers came out of Texas, I'll tell you that.
Yep, that's true.
Roger wasn't too bad, although we're not out talking too much about him, but he was quite a pitcher.
Yes, he was. All right, guys, thanks very much for your time. I appreciate you having me.
Nice. Thank you very much. It was our pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you.